there, friends and sane persons. It's me, Skeletor. Well, actually, I'm not going to wear this the whole time because I don't think you'll be able to hear me. It's me, Kyle, and welcome to another episode of Wednesday Whimsy. Let me see if I can change my name because I'm not really Skeletor, sadly. Um, no Fez tonight because I have something else to wear. Um, Wednesday Whimsy, if it's your first time joining, or of course, even if it's not, is a short show I do every Wednesday evening where I talk about a board game topic, a top 10 list, or something that happens to catch my mind at some point. Today, if you couldn't tell by the title or the outfit, we are talking about the biggest game to come out in a long time for me. I mean, there are games I'm excited for, and then there's this. So I'm a child of the 1980s, and the best, if you were a child in the 80s, you at least in the U.S., you definitely had heard at least of He-Man. So the game I am talking about today is Masters of the Universe Clash for Eternia. I only have one of the boxes down here. It was a huge Kickstarter from Simon. Let me start by clarifying one thing. It's very confusing because there's another game called Masters of the Universe Fields of Eternia, and that is by, I believe, a company called Archon Studios. The two games were on Kickstarter at the same time. They are releasing about the same time. This is the Simon one, which was released, I think, exclusively in North America due to licensing reasons. Clash for Eternia. Fields of Eternia is being released in Europe, and I will be picking up my copy. I had one delivered to a friend that I'm going to pick up when I go over to Europe for Eurovision. So I'll have more on that one at a future date. Currently, I know very little about that one, other than its Castle Grayskull Dice Tower. But we're not talking about that one today. We are talking about Clash for Eternia, the Simon one, the North American one. So let's talk a little bit about the game, and I will tell you whether it disappoints or whether it excites or whatever else I happen to be thinking about it. But first, what is it about? Well, it's the first in a line that's called the Power System game. And I think that's a preview of coming attractions. But basically, you take on the role of some of your favorite characters from the Masters of the Universe license, the He-Man license, and you play against an opponent who's also playing with some of their characters. Ideally, there will be a set of one person will take on some heroic warriors, and one person will take on some evil forces, but you can pretty much do whatever you want. The game provides lots of possibilities there. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But basically, you are going to be playing a scenario. They are scenarios that will take about 45 minutes, I think, if you played it at a good pace. And it's going to be one person takes on the role of a team of 3 characters, and the other person takes on the role of 1 to 4 characters, and you can do that. One person can control 4. You can have one person control 1. It could be 3-on-1. You could have you could play against 4 people and have them each control a character, and then it would be 3-on-4. Lots of ways to do it, but you're doing scenario-specific objectives, which basically usually means running around, rolling dice, fighting each other, maybe trying to find some objectives. Different things depending on the scenario. You will do that until someone meets the victory conditions, and then the game is over, and that's kind of what it's about. So how does it work? Well, I already mentioned, let's kind of go over and look at it a little bit. This is a scenario. This is the Assault on Castle Grayskull scenario, and surprisingly, and this person has purchased the upgraded pieces, as did I, and the nice playmat. But basically, you're going to have these are the player. So the person, the player character. There's 2 sides: player and controller. Player is going to be the 1 to 4 characters that each operate independently, and the controller will be the one that operates as a team of 3 plus a bunch of minions. You're going to place your characters on their starting spaces. There's going to be some sort of scenario that you're going for. You might be trying to knock out 5 characters. You might be trying to find objectives and carry them home. A lot of different things. And but really what you're going to do is there's a lot of interesting planning that goes on. This track over here it says controller player, and so the controller is going to be placing 4 cards face down, one for each of the characters, and then one that's called a strategy card. And you'll be planning your turn face down, and then the player character will also be doing that with their characters. Obviously, if you're only playing with one character, it's not a surprise. But if you were playing, for example, with all 4, your opponent would know that all 4 were going to activate, but not necessarily in which order. On your turn, you reveal the card, and your character takes its turn. You're going to gain a resource called power. The person who goes first, the controller, gets no power on the first turn, and then each turn after that, the players are going to get slightly more. You're going to place this power on a board, and that's going to fuel your various special abilities that you have in the game. Oops, that's too far in for the zooming. Let me see if I can find. I guess I never can, right? But basically, you get this power, and then you're going to take a certain number of actions. Each character has a card somebody has both of them. There's lots of. The problem with this is lots of the pictures are just going to show the various artwork and the figures. But you're going to have this board, and it has room for special abilities. Anyway, I'll leave that there for now. But on your turn, you can move, you can attack, or you can do some other sort of special action. When you attack, you roll a certain number of dice. Your opponent can activate a defensive ability. You can activate boosts. There are hits for ranged, hits for close combat, and sort of a wild side that gives you an additional power. Basically, it's your sort of standard miniature skirmish game. It's just going to happen really quickly. But sort of the key piece is that every so often in the game, it's going to escalate. So it could be at the end of every turn, every round. It could be at the end when somebody is knocked out. It could be when something's discovered. But at various points in the game, you're going to tick down this track, and when it gets to certain thresholds, everybody's going to power up. So let's say that I had He-Man. When I get to my first escalation, I'm going to get to choose one of it's green. So there's a green special ability. It's a double-sided card, and I can choose which side of that card I want to be active. And then that gives me a new special ability that I can power. I can use my power to kind of use, and then, but all the characters are going to do it at the same time. So the controller is going to get to activate a special ability on one of his characters, and then the player character is going to get all of theirs powered up. So you're going to get slowly more powerful, but it's not just that it happens slowly, it's that it's going to be guaranteed. This escalation trigger happens all the time, and so you're going to get to see all your special abilities. Like He-Man, his level 3 special ability is that you replace him with this mounted riding battle cat figure. Skeletor has his special abilities. They all have their own, and it makes it really quite interesting. But basically, on your turn, you're going to do your two actions, and then it's the next person's turn, and you're going to go 8 characters total. If you're playing with fewer than 4, obviously some are going to be double activated. The controller character has one special action called strategy that's going to allow him to move around and attack with the various minions and play and acquire certain special cards. I'm going to close this because it's distracting me. And then you're basically just trying to go through the scenario, unlock your special abilities, and complete your goal first. First to complete the goal wins. So what makes the game special? Well, there's a few things, and I don't always start with this, but I'm going to here. The first thing that makes this special is the IP, the lore and the story and the characters of He-Man are basically screaming to me from my childhood. This was, I was born in the early 80s, and He-Man kind of came to its height when I was, 3 to 5, maybe a little older. But it was the show that I watched every day. I had all the figures. I loved to play with my He-Man action figures. I just really enjoyed it. I loved watching the show. I saw that He-Man and She-Ra Secret of the Sword movie so many times. I mean, that was the movie in my childhood that I watched again and again. This IP just sings to me. Now, that might not be the case for you. If you grew up, after the late 80s, you might not really have any experience with He-Man, although he did come back in the early 2000s, and he's had a bit of a resurgence in recent years with a Netflix cartoon. So you might be able to identify with him. But regardless, the theme for me is a big plus. Another thing that I really like is, so the game is styled as a one versus many game. And in those games, usually the person who plays the one has to play one particular side. So if I'm going to be sort of the team controller, I have to be the bad guy, or I have to be the heroic team. And this game, no, doesn't. That's not a thing. Either side can be played by either set of rules. Um, the game doesn't really contemplate it, but there's no reason you really couldn't just play head to head, like both people playing characters. I mean, you could alter the rules slightly probably and do that, but the fact that you can play either side as either player, no one's stuck with one side versus the other. Like, if I'm teaching this game to somebody, I'm going to play the controller side because it's a little bit more involved, but it doesn't mean that that person can't be any character they want. Also, although some scenarios say, evil warriors should be played by this character, you can mix and match it however you want, really. There's no reason you couldn't swap stuff around. Very flexible in that regard. Also, if you got the Kickstarter version, or if you buy the expansions, there are so many characters. This has almost every He-Man character that you would want, with the exception of Cyclone, who inexplicably is not there. But everyone else, and maybe some that you might not know as well. But if there's a He-Man character that you knew growing up, it's here. And that includes She-Ra. She and her team are there. The Evil Horde is there. And even the Snake Men, who, were some of the best action figures, even they are in here. So, it's really got everything that, as a He-Man fan, you would want. Now, if you're not a He-Man fan, that's okay. There's a lot of characters to choose from. And even if you don't know who, Too Bad or Mosquito are, you can play with it. You can say, oh, this one looks cool. I'll play with it. And it will be fun and interesting. Also, the characters are all, well, for the most part, I haven't looked at them all yet, but for the most part are fairly different, fairly distinct, and kind of tie into their storyline. For example, I mentioned the Too Bad character. This was a two bounty hunters that were smushed together into one. So it's a guy with two heads, one set of legs, one set of arms. And they were always bickering. Well, in the game, it suggests that two different people play him, right? He's split as two characters, and so you'll have different people making decisions for them. And all his special abilities are about the characters arguing with each other or working together and getting some sort of bonus. Or there was a character named King Hiss who, looked like a human, but he could shed his skin and turn into a five-headed snake. Well, that is what this character does. When you upgrade him to the end, you replace him with this five-headed snake that's super powered. Things like that. All the special abilities, for the most part, all feel different and feel true to their theme. It feels like somebody who really liked the TV show and the cartoons, and the action figures, the IP, kind of spent some time on this and really made it the game he wanted to play. And so that makes it the game I want to play. Another thing that's special about it, though, is it's super simple. All right, the rule book is not great. We'll talk about that in a moment. But once you get through it, there's very little looking up. There's not keywords. There's not, what does this do? Well, maybe there's some interactions you might not remember. But basically, you've got just a couple of actions on your turn, and you jump in. You say, I want to do this. I want to pick up this rock and throw it. I want to get on my giant green tiger and ride around. I want to fire a laser beam from my Havoc staff. Whatever it might be, the rules don't get in the way. The rules are there to allow you to have a fun experience, but they are not complicated. They're not clunky. They're just so smooth that anybody can learn this game in just a few minutes and go straight to having a good time. Another plus is that there's a solo mode. So if you're like me and you didn't have anybody visiting the week when it came in, you could jump in, set it up, and go. Now the solo mode is a little clunkier than the basic one. There are some contradictions between the rule book and some of the reference cards. There are some interactions that aren't quite clear. But that's as a solo game, and so you can kind of just do what you want. You're experiencing the game anyway, and you're there for the experience. But I like that there's a solo mode that allows you to play really any of the sides. All the characters come with a solo version, so it's easy to add anybody in and just play most of the scenarios solo. So a lot of good to say about it. Let's talk about a couple of buts. First butt I mentioned is the rule book. It is a bit of a rough rule book. Some of the things are although everything's explained in there, it's not the best organized. You'll find yourself, maybe wondering where things were. That said, once you've read it, once you know how to play, you probably don't need to look at it again. It's the rules are so simple that it doesn't really get in the way, but learning it from the rules was a bit of a chore, especially around the AI side, the solo version. Another but is that because it's scenario based, setting up the scenarios might take a little while. You've got to kind of dig around and find the right terrain. And that can get in the way a little bit, and also there aren't that many scenarios. If you got the Kickstarter one, there's, I don't know, maybe 10, which is probably enough, and it's the kind of thing I'm sure more could come out. But, the basic scenario is probably just have the people fight each other anyway. So that's easy. It's okay, right? You're there for the experience, not necessarily for the story of the scenario. But be aware that there might not be as many scenarios as I had hoped for. I will say, though, it's good that you can play them with any number of characters. You're not like stuck to 6 characters like you are in, say, Zombicide. So it's a lot of flexibility there, but there is that. Another thing is availability. And I wouldn't normally talk about this. Sometimes I do, but I think it's only available in North America due to various IP restrictions, which is dumb, but it is what it is. So if you're living in Europe, you're Asia, you're probably going to have some trouble getting this game. Also, because it was a CMON Kickstarter, there's a big box of the exclusive stuff, and that includes a lot of the fun characters. And so, if you didn't get that, you're going to, you won't have as much. I will say the base game probably needed about 5 more characters for each side. It comes with the big ones that you would expect, Skeletor, He-Man, Teela, and Evil Lyn, and a couple of the other ones, Trapjaw, Triclops, Man-at-Arms, Orko. Sort of the big headliners, but you'll really want that extra box because it has all the kind of fun characters that were a little bit side stories. So just be aware that there might be some availability issues. Now, I think you can buy the expansions like the Snake Man and the Horde separately. It's just that one box of the extra sort of stretch goals that you'll feel like you're missing out if you didn't get. So let's see. I think that's it. That's all the negatives I can say. So what's my rating? If you couldn't tell, I think this game is fantastic. It's so much fun. I didn't know when it was coming. I knew it was coming soon, but as soon as it did, it was all I did for several days. I set this up and I just played it as much as I could. I looked at lots of the characters, not all of them. There's maybe a little bit too much. I guess maybe that's another negative, is it's kind of hard to store. But I'm sure somebody will develop an insert for it. Yeah, but I really like this game. I think it's really going to be fantastic. I'm tempted to give it a 10, but I'm going to stop just shy and give it a 9.99999, which I'll round down to a 9. A 9 out of 10, just because it's not going to be as available, and if you don't like the IP, it might not be as magical for you as it is for me. But for me, it's magical. I mean, this is the game I was waiting for. It's the game I did not know I needed. It is. It's just so much fun. It's the kind of game that I'm hoping that somebody will come over just to play this with me, and it won't be like one of those longer campaign games. Well, that's another positive. It's not a campaign. It is a scenario. Right? You open a scenario, you play that scenario, you put it away, and you are not committing. You're not getting married to this game. You can play it and be done with it, or play it and play it again. Switch sides, whatever you want, as much as you want. It's just so flexible and fun. Um, I might even correct it and say, for me, I think for most people I would call it a 9, but for me it's probably a 10. Let's say it like that. And this is my show, so 10 out of 10 for me. Maybe 9 out of 10 if you don't love He-Man. But But if you can get it, I recommend trying it. I think this will work for a lot of people, even people who kind of are afraid of big minis games, because it's not a big minis game. It just has, it has figures in it. I need to get mine painted. It would look so good painted. Anyway, 10 out of 10 for me. A game that I was really excited for, and a game that really did not disappoint. And what more can I ask from a game than everything I could have possibly ever wanted? That's going to be it for today. A couple of things I wanted to say, though. CMON does have the license for Thundercats. They've put out some Thundercat minis for Zombicide, and so I do not look. I do not know this, but I can definitely see a Thundercats version coming in this system, which would probably be compatible, which would be what every '80s child wanted. Also, I will be doing Fields of Eternia once I get it and I've had a chance to play it. I don't think it can top this, but maybe I'm wrong. So we'll talk more about that. I'll talk about it. I'll compare them coming up probably in May after I get back from Eurovision. But anyway, for now, I'm going to end this discussion of He-Man and its associated game by wishing you safe travels and courage when you need it. And I will see you back hopefully soon, next week perhaps, for another discussion on another episode of Wednesday Whimsy. So for now, bye-bye.